I'm Dr. Aaron Penix. Welcome to my presentation, Surfacing Ecological Disaster, Poets for Living Waters in the Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill. On April 20th, 2010, BP's Deepwater Horizon drilling platform exploded, killing 11 workers, injuring 17 others, and instigating the largest marine oil spill in history. Over 200 million gallons of crude oil and 4 million pounds of gas leaked into the Gulf of Mexico, creating an environmental disaster as well as a public relations disaster that BP sought to mitigate with prodigious use of Corexit. Oil is hydrophobic, which means it is repelled by water's polarity and gathers on the water's surface. Corexit is a chemical dispersant that breaks oil into smaller droplets, causing the oil to sink into the water column. Corexit is also itself quite toxic, and when combined with oil, the resulting mixture is 52 times more toxic than oil alone. Banned in almost 24 countries, including the United Kingdom, Corexit has been designated a chronic and acute health hazard by the EPA and has been identified as the cause of health problems and even several deaths among cleanup workers after the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. Notably, only about 1,000 gallons of Corexit were used for the Valdez oil spill, while 1.8 million gallons were used for the Deepwater Horizon spill, either dispersed underwater near the mouth of the broken pipe or dropped by airplanes, often under the cover of night. On May 19, 2010, about a month after the oil spill began, and well before the Deepwater Horizon pipe was capped on July 15th, poets Amy King and Heidi Lynn Staples put out a call for submissions for a new online platform for poems written either in response to the ongoing disaster or in support of healthy ocean ecosystems. The online poetry platform Poets for Living Waters was active for 4 years and includes the work of over 250 poets. In contradistinction to the ways BP sought to control the optics of the oil spill by submerging the oil in the water column, Poets for Living Waters utilizes the visibility and accessibility of the internet to figuratively raise this submerged oil, challenging BP's obfuscation as well as the oil's negative effects on animals and humans. I consider Poets for Living Waters as engaging with the elements of oil into water, as well as functioning as an antithesis to the dispersant Corexit. By figuratively raising oil's toxic specter to the surface, the poetry platform challenges America's petrochemical dependence and failure to protect ocean ecosystems. Similarly, we can see in the oil spill the interplay of two elements of oil and water, including oil's toxicity and stickiness, as well as the three-dimensional circulation of water. Despite being formed from formerly living creatures, oil is antithetical to life's productive operations. In a section of her book, Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the Gulf Oil Spill, titled, appropriately enough, Oil Can Kill You, Antonio Juarez writes that, quote, crude oil is toxic to humans, plants, and wildlife, capable of causing serious debilitation and even death to anyone who comes in contact with it. Crude oil contains high levels of volatile organic compounds, such as benzene, toluene, and xylene. These substances affect the central nervous system, cause acute toxicity, cancer, birth defects, and liver and kidney damage. Similarly, oil is deadly to animals in many ways. When oil coats an animal, it can limit the creature's ability to swim, fly, navigate, maintain body temperature, feed properly, and even reproduce. Oil can harm the eyes, mouth, and nasal tissue, as well as the immune system, red blood cells, and organs like the liver, lungs, and stomach, end quote. Oil's toxic and negative effects persist in the environment for a long time, but this toxicity is only amplified with the addition of Corexit. With its name sounding similar to Corexit, Corexit mitigates oil's negative effects on the surface and along beaches by emulsifying oil into smaller droplets that sink and become suspended. BP used two forms of Corexit, both of which are proprietary formulas of the Nalco company, which has released only a partial list of ingredients. BP first used Corexit 9527A before switching to Corexit 9500 in response to public outcry and pressure from the EPA. Corexit 9527A contains a solvent that can injure blood cells, kidneys, and the liver. Corexit 9500 also contains known carcinogens, and the toxins from both can transfer up the food chain. Additionally, by breaking the oil into smaller parts, the dispersant helps the toxic parts of the oil to actually become small enough to pass through skin, as well as become aerosolized when the ocean water evaporates. BP purchased over 1/3 of the world's supply of these chemicals, and of the over 1.8 million gallons used, almost 40% was applied underwater at the source of the oil leak, an underwater application of Corexit that had never been tested or studied. The remaining Corexit was sprayed by airplanes. The outcome of all this, of course, was to both transfer the oil into the ocean and to make it significantly more toxic. Here we might think of the elemental qualities of water, and particularly a body of water as large as the Gulf of Mexico. Oceans contain an incredible range of biodiversity, as well as 99% of the planet's habitable space. Oceans are spaces of circulation. Currents flow, global tidal shifts circle the planet, whale carcasses fall to the floor, and upwellings of nutrients rise from the ocean depths. This fluidity also disperses the crude oil, ensuring that the oil recirculates for a long time over large areas of the Gulf. The effects on ocean life have been enormous. In considering the slow violence in the Gulf of Mexico, Rob Nixon describes the usage of Corexit as a biocide. The submerged Corexit oil mixture exemplifies Nixon's concept of slow violence, or the sort of, quote, violence that occurs gradually and out of sight, a violence of delayed destruction that is dispersed across time and space, and attritional violence that is typically not viewed as violence at all, end quote. For the underwater creatures that encounter the Corexit oil mixture, however, the effects are outsized. For instance, due to Corexit breaking oil into smaller droplets the same size as algae, filter feeders like oysters, which would not have been affected by the oil without the use of Corexit, now are. Fish gills get clogged, and the mixture has proven highly toxic to coral. It is estimated that 8.3 billion, with a B, oysters were lost in the aftermath of the oil spill, and that 32% of the laughing gulls population in the northern Gulf died. Corexit has been found in the eggs of pelicans, has been found to overwhelm the livers of red snappers. Dolphins in the Gulf have been particularly affected by the oil Corexit mixture. A study found that because of late-term pregnancy failures, in utero infections, and fetal distress, 75% of the dolphins studied in the Gulf are unable to conceive and carry a pregnancy to term, and that it will take at least 40 to 50 years for the population to rebound. Thus, while BP's usage of Corexit helped to minimize oil's anti-life effects on the surface and shore, it also created a highly toxic undersea environment with demonstrable long-term effects on sea life. As elements, the qualities of oil and water are importantly different. Oil is toxic and antithetical to the functioning of life, while water is life-supporting. Due to oil's hydrophobia, these two elements had previously remained distinct, but Corexit intermixes the two, pairing oil's toxicity with the three-dimensional circulation of water. At the core of this elemental intermixing lies the decision to treat the ocean and ocean life as disposable. As Stacey Alamo points out, quote, the vastness of the seas has long buoyed the cultural conception of the ocean as impervious to human harm. Nonetheless, contemporary global practices of dumping garbage, sewage, weapons, toxic chemicals, and radioactive waste assume that the dispersing the substances or forces across the breadth and depth of the seas will make them disappear, end quote. BP treated the ocean depths as an erasure zone. As Jeffrey Jerome Cohn and Lowell Duckert point out in their introduction to the edited collection Elemental Eco-Criticism, quote, elemental obligation arrives in a doubled sense. The elements companion and assist. They also materially and ethically bind. Elemental agency engenders perspectival tumble, an unstable shift between familiar domestic frames. The elements are the substance of the inhabited world, and the disorientation of a wildness that may be distant or within. The elements are climatic, or as well as corporeal and diegetic forces, end quote. We can see exactly this sort of unstable shift between the domestic frame of oil, which underlies so much of contemporary Western life, and the incredible repercussions of oil's escape into the ocean. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill was an instance of oil escaping our control, but in pairing the oil with Corexit and submerging it in the depths, oil's anti-life effects became stronger and more dispersed. Essentially, by using dispersants to submerge the oil, BP rewilded oil, amplifying its anti-life effects and allowing it to escape within the elemental circulation of water. Foisting these negative effects on ocean life helped BP, America, and other oil-dependent societies to avoid having a sustained encounter with the incredible dangers that an oil-dependent economy entails. Obfuscating the oil invites cultural forgetting by shuttling this annihilation of life from the shore to the depths, out of sight, and thus presumably out of mind. Indeed, Cohn and Duckert address capitalism's motivations to forget the essence of elements when they write that, quote, through active and recurring forgetting, the apprehension of material vibrancy evident in elemental theory has been obscured by mechanistic models that serve commodity capitalism well, but license environmental destruction. To counteract the flattening force of this collective amnesia, we need more and better models of inhuman challenge and environmental agentism. Call it reactivism, where the is not simply a simple repetition of a previous form, but a renewal of non/human ethical enmeshment, a trans-historical call to attention in which lessons from the past are reactivated for better futures, end quote. This reactivism and its renewal of non/human ethical enmeshment is the sort of project that Poets for Living Waters pursues. Poets for Living Waters challenges the capitalist-fueled impetus toward forgetting the environmental destruction and devastation of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. It functions as an open-ended call for non/human ethical enmeshment and demands a better present and future. Even in its name, its demand for living waters, we would find a refusal of the capitalist logic that submerged oil to create dead waters. Rather than submerging the deadly specter of oil within the ocean, Poets for Living Waters reasserts water as a vital and vibrant medium. In 2011, the poetry journal Interim included a special dossier that responded to the BP oil crisis in Poets for Living Waters. Editor Kristen Baumlier describes the poetry platform as both monumental and minutely varied. In a contribution titled How Poetry Makes a Difference in the Area of Ecocide, Heidi Lynn Staples, one of the co-founders of Poets for Living Waters, writes, and this is a bit of a long quote, so there's a few excisions here. I do think poetry has a place in response to public catastrophe. Poets for Living Waters has not shut down BP. The site has not prevented the harm of birds, sea turtles, and marine mammals found dead or injured in the Gulf of Mexico. The site has not protected Gulf Coast residents from the toxic chemicals. Instead, art fulfills its potential through creating connections. Poets for Living Waters has provided a virtual gathering place, and in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, the site often received close to 1,000 visits a day. The site functions as a forum in which to share grief, trauma, outrage, and a desire for change. The site will also extend the historical record. The poems, photos, statements of conscience, and videos of readings and protests will attest that we were not just slaughtering one another. But I believe the project's greatest significance lies in cultivating a type of interchange, a reciprocity in community. Art offers us not tools to master our universe, but the potential to experience community, interconnectivity, wide identification, the possibility of wisdom. Our engagement can generate alternate cultures. Art is not so much a tool or a noun, but participation in a process, a verb, end quote. There are a lot of productive points to unpack here, but briefly, refusing the submersion of oil and its detrimental effects, Poets for Living Waters congeals different voices and offers us alternative models that refuse the capitalist biocide of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Furthermore, the platform acts as a curated and shared space of grief, a digital archive of outrage and reimagination that may become even more important in the developing Anthropocene. Poetry, with its ability to make the invisible visible and to put into words the unspeakable, becomes a space of grief, of remembrance, and a demand for change that challenges our society's dependence on oil. This is as true 11 years ago when the site was founded as it is now, and presumably will remain into the future. Simultaneously, the site looks to water as a source of life and connection. The interconnectivity and interchange that the platform fosters looks to me much like the ocean circulation, the upwellings and downwellings that bring different ocean lives into proximity, the plankton, the fish, and the dolphin that cohabitate within this watery medium. Finally, I want to point out that Poets for Living Waters led to other environmentally attentive works, including the collection Big Energy Poets, Eco-Poetry Thinks Climate Change, published in 2017. It has the same co-editors. As the introduction to Big Energy Poets notes, this collection emerged from Poets for Living Waters and describes Poets for Living Waters as, quote, an online international poetry response to the 2010 BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, the biggest man-made environmental disaster in U.S. history, that monumentally farcical botch with implications unto geological time, end quote. Much as Poets for Living Waters still exist online, and much as oil still exists in the sands and water column of the Gulf of Mexico, poetry embodies the impetus to bring into language challenges to attempts to submerge and seemingly erase environmental disaster. Poetry has the ability to bring back into light such environmental destruction. And here I want to kind of look at the platform and share that with you. Here I want to give you a little bit of an example of what the platform looks like. As you can see, it congeals a lot of different voices, a lot of different poets, and a lot of different works without clear distinguishing between them. It kind of congeals them into one larger whole. I think this is antithetical to the way that Corexit breaks apart and disperses. I've chosen two poems basically at random to discuss, just to give you a bit more of an idea of how the individual poems work. Poets for Living Waters, of course, Oil Spill by Tara Betts. When the knife enters and rotates, hemorrhage spumes into currents. Black blood tinged red laps pulse into blue flushed with viscous night. Clouds water. Fish bellies obscured, white, still gills, stiff as clotted feathers weighed down. No touch stems the flow. Teacup ships float in a flood. The knife turns deeper when a bell jar fails to pump a gulf back to safety. No eyes soak up miles gone, cloaked in endless black scalloped, into oily deserts abandoned by fishermen, tourists. No one ventures to dead beaches. While company town founders and barons bedeck organic vegetables with bone china and folded hand-woven cotton napkins, oil in their dreams, raises profit margin buoys, and glazes salads with extra virgin olive. Slick does not stain everyone's water glasses, just ones that have to twist the tap. And then there's an attending statement. If you've seen documentaries like Flow for Love of Water or even Mos Def's song New World Water, then you already know that the planet's water supply is in danger. We have a limited supply tainted by pollutants. Those pollutants travel and circulate through all the other water bodies. People have thought for years that there was an island of plastic growing larger every day in the northern gyre of the Pacific Ocean. Actually, it breaks down into tiny particles of basic polymers that wildlife eat and absorb. Such particles are difficult to filter out of the water. Imagine what is not visible to the human eye and absorbed by the body, and how plastic from bottle caps, plastic bags, toothbrushes travels for miles to break down in the sea, tangle into masses that trap and kill animals, and become toxic of bisphenol A. And then consider how rapidly a constant gush of oil might travel. The impetus for this poem is the diminished access to water, which is already becoming privatized in some parts of the world. What would happen if we all had to pay exorbitant prices for water, the one resource all living creatures need, and most of the world's inhabitants are not wealthy? Here we look at a second poem by Kristen Kashuk, reduced to quatrain. Again, down at the water birds tread, feet in mire, wings mucked. Once fish wash up and a few beaks pick at, twitch inside them, the dead and half-dead littering the shore of plastics. Am I terrified that these immensities of what I've done are licensed? Yes. Rage erupts, and me part owner of a dam. Oceans die, and to do nothing I wade into the dying, my body asking to offer itself comfort, some lulling rhythmic term borrowed even longer ago from a wave. And in the statement, I don't know how one should make poems out of sorrow, complicity, and impotence. I only hope that making poems can be a first step toward action. While this is happening, I've been reading aloud Madeleine L'Engle's book, A Wrinkle in Time, to my sons. In that book, 3 children travel light years from home to fight a dark cloud that they are told also shadows the earth. Such a shadow has leapt from metaphor into our water, the amniotic fluid of the planet. Art can feel small against this, and crucial. So I do invite you to visit this platform and some of the various poems that are here. There are many, over 250. I do think that overall also this is a good example of how poetry can challenge the environmental destruction, or at least offer challenges and new alternatives. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.